Welcome. It's very good to have you here, Yinka, Asma, and Dorothée. It was an honor to see your wonderful play, and we'll start with Dorothée. We'll start with Yinka and Asma, and then later Dorothée will join. Yinka, to start with you. You're a flamenco dancer. I also saw it in the piece. I wonder, how did you, the 6 artists in the play, in Maze, how did you come together?
I think Dorothée is the person who kind of brought us all together. I think that at different stages, we'd all had some sort of contact, connection with Dorothée, either on the kind of professional level or also on the personal, which I think is one of the special things about this work, is that there's a sort of interweaving of the personal and the sort of artistic, which is inevitable, but I think particularly here. And in my case, in particular, I actually know Dorothée from a very long time ago. We went to the same school in London, but only sort of found each other again after finding out that we're both sort of work in performance, which was such a wonderful kind of realization. And Dorothée invited me to take part in a work she was doing, Woad, in, I think that was 2019. And sort of from then, the opportunity, I think Dorothée felt, but obviously she'll speak about this later, but the desire to sort of bring together these sort of different women, different Black women who somehow had sort of, well, in my case, I think coming to Dorothée has been a real opportunity to sort of share things that maybe in other spaces we don't get to. I think that's what's been so special about working with Dorothée.
But what do you mean with it's inevitable? Like you could not avoid it, bringing your own personal experience in it?
I think that the approach, you know, the freedom, the beautiful thing about how Mai was conceived, which I very much feel was kind of an intention on Dorothée's part, was to allow us to be 100% in the room. So there was always a sense that, first of all, it's you as a being, you as a spirit, and then from there, how do we converse? So I think that meant that maybe we could go to places where, you know, if you're just sort of like, okay, come, in my case, as a flamenco dancer, you know, just like, okay, we'll do these steps, this choreography, that wasn't the way in this work.
Okay, and Asma, you're a poet, a spoken word artist, a visual artist. I saw a lot of different styles in the piece, so indeed spoken word, dancing, singing. How was it? How did you experience this coming together of these different styles?
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. I think it was actually very beautiful, and I felt quite natural as well. So we would like do long improvs, and some of them are like Yinka is a flamenco dancer, so would be dancing, and then I think I would like respond to what I saw in front of me and maybe say something on the microphone. So it felt quite natural. I think we were always like responding to each other.
Whoa, whoa. Oh, whoa, whoa. Oh, whoa, well, you know, Hoy went into the sea, Hoy came out of the sea, shimmering, shivering, scars. Everywhere you touched her, you mocked her. Oh, she cursed you. Your daughter cursed you. She said, go into the mouth of hell. Oh, she cursed you. Oh, Hoy went into the sea, Hoy came out of the sea. Desert scars. Everywhere you touched her. Oh, well, you know. Where did you go? Oh, well, you know. You're where the drones are. You are a drone now. Pulsing, infrared, and in our rib bones and gold. So you would find us, but you wouldn't. You couldn't. Oh, where did you go? Oh, where? Your camel bell is broken. It rusted. It drowned. Taklosh, Namasta. To shovel some more. It's some more. Oh, some more. I watched them. Oh, they rusted. Oh, they decomposed. Oh, I forgot you were human. Loose flesh and bones. Oh, Hoyle. You mocked her. Your daughter. She cursed you. Oh, she cursed you. Oh, how could you? Oh, you left us.
Okay, haguruka mwana tugende ababyeyi banjye barambwiye bati haguruka tugende we kugira ubwoba abo mugendana bose ni bakuru cyangwa batoya ariko ntugire ubwoba we kugira ubwoba abo mwakubanye bose naho we kugira ubwoba ababyeyi banjye barambwiye bati haguruka mwana tugende.
And the play maze, if I pronounce it correctly, like it means a mesh, entanglement, some kind of connection. And for me, I noticed some, actually solidarity on stage. And I wonder, was there immediately like a connection between you as artists with each other?
Initially, I met Doro at another festival. But I think that was one of the beautiful things actually when we first met, is that Doro really took the time to introduce everyone, the way that they'd met, what moved them about that particular person. And then, it was really easy to then, talk to Yinka and get to know her and get to know Nidale, Ife, Elsa. I think it felt very natural because we would always have conversations about the work and about ourselves and where we were coming from.
And Yinka, if you could describe this connection, how would you describe it? Was it an artistic connection, or you between women or between Black women? How would you describe it? I
think I'd come back to the humanity. I'm really glad that Asma mentioned their names, because it's like, I don't know, it's been this discovery of sisterhood almost. So Elsa Mulder, I had also met and been collaborating with in a completely different project for quite a few months. So it was really beautiful to actually get to then share space, because we also have to remember that this was created during the pandemic. And so a lot of us had been isolated, and so this opportunity in the little window that we could travel suddenly was incredible to then encounter these incredible beings. And so when we were all together, I feel like in my case, it was also a case of really learning from each other and just hearing and listening. And so all the process of the improvisations were just almost being taken on by each other, and sort of if those different people hadn't been there, everything would be completely different, because it's very much how we each took us to different places that I think things came together, and then Doro was able to kind of put that in a concrete sort of space, let's say.
Yeah, and you, as a flamenco dancer, I wonder, that's also of course, something personal that you bring in. What's your connection to this dance? I mean, you say you live in Seville. I don't think you come maybe traditionally from a family which dances to flamenco. Can you explain or elaborate a bit on this?
Yes, indeed. I'm from London, and in times beyond COVID, I'm usually in England a lot, so I'm back and forth, which is very important to me because, as you say, I'm not from Spain. I'm not born into a flamenco family, but somehow something in, I don't know, I often think it actually called me. I started taking classes when I was at university, and it's been this sort of slow reveal, in a sense, that I never got into it knowing what I was going to do. So I just first started almost I'm really interested, I want to learn more. That then took me to Madrid. Actually, first took me to Barcelona, then it took me to Madrid. And it's almost been this quest to know it better, a quest to understand it more, that has then eventually brought me to Seville, which is also, Andalucía is really where flamenco is born. So it almost felt like I needed to come here. you're experiencing in a whole other way, because these are kind of ways of life. They're not just that, it's not an academic thing that you can necessarily go to university for in that sense. So I think what's beautiful about now coming to Mai and other work that I'm doing as well is that I'm sort of finding the truth that where I lie in between those things. So flamenco is very much a part of how my body expresses itself, but I'm also looking at other things. In this journey, I've also understood and learned that there was an African presence in Spain, that actually the south of Spain and Black people have been in coexistence for centuries, and that flamenco is a sort of a part of that. The same way lots of musics on the Americas came up because of the Black population, flamenco is also influenced in part by the African population. So it's been this discovery in a sense. I feel like I'm still in it. And so I feel it makes sense for me to then be in works like Mai and other works I've done in collaboration with like contemporary dancers, and even the latest work I'm doing now. It's not strict flamenco. It's kind of like trying to open it almost in an attempt to open and allow us all to see where those crossings take place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yes, it does. And in the play, women speak about violence, oppression, trauma, but I also saw a lot of joy, actually, and a celebration. And Dorothée said earlier, or I read it somewhere else, it's a celebration of women, of African and Afro-descendant women. Can you elaborate on this, about this? Yeah, this celebration part.
I think it did feel joyful, and I think that was one of the decisions that we made, and something that Ife actually brought into the conversation. That when you're Black, there's obviously a lot of oppression everywhere, but also that it was really important to like bring back the joy into the piece. And I think there's like a number that is called Alive, and I feel like that is really like celebrating the fact that we are here, and even like making the piece at certain times felt really heavy because there was a lot of upheaval happening like across the world. So for us, it was like about not just representing, or not just us being on stage, but also understanding that we are bringing all these unseen people with us, and that we're celebrating them.
Yeah, and later someone sings, let's celebrate, let's dance, you come from far, carrying inside you a land still coveted, still despoiled. Here it touches, like for me, it touched like the violence or which is being carried. What does it mean to carry this, and or what did you want to show to the audience?
It's a song that I wrote in which I really was imagining what it would be like returning to a home that you've been carrying all along in your body, but that was physically or geographically far from where you are. So it's this question of whether being in exile or in the diaspora, or longing, this question of longing for a home. Even though you might be at home in another place, you might feel at home in this country that maybe your parents chose or your family chose. And so I just felt like, what would be that celebration of returning, that celebration of finding that land, physical land, or imaginary land. And because for me, Nido Uwera, who's dancing at that moment, she's Rwandan, but she was born in exile in Burundi.
Warakuze none ugarutse ariko warakuze none ugarutse kubashira.
We often spoke about what it would be like for her, or what it was like for her for the first time to go to Rwanda. And at the same time, I was thinking of Elsa Mulder's story. So she was born in Ethiopia, and she was adopted by Dutch parents. And she went once to Ethiopia to kind of reconnect with her country, with the country of her ancestors. And I was thinking of this question of crossing over, this question of movement, of returning, of going towards this land that is neither behind you or in front of you. It's just a crossing over. So for me, this country, or these countries we come from, often have been violated. Mm-hmm. They've been invaded. They've been despoiled. They've been fought for as well. And so there is this mixture of joyful, like rejoicing for this return, and at the same time knowing very well that what you are returning to might not be what you have been carrying or the image you have been carrying.
Where did the idea come from to create this play? Can you tell us a bit about that?
I guess it came from a need of wanting to gather women that I had met the last few years who have touched me and have moved me and inspired me, and with whom I felt I could weave some type of work that is beyond myself. So I went from a purely autobiographical stance to opening to other voices, but from the Rwandan point of view, or from women that I had met and interviewed in Rwanda. And the more I kept performing this piece, the more I met other wonderful, wonderful women that I felt like it would be such a powerful way of collaborating with them and expanding into their own stories and really weaving together this work called Mai, because I just felt like I couldn't exist on stage by myself anymore. Like I needed them as well, their bodies, their voices, their craft, their words, to feel like a multitude. So I really wanted to gather voices that have been dispersed, of bodies of humans that have been dispersed throughout the world because of history, because of the violent history of
trafficking, really,
human trafficking, slave trade, colonialism. These women, for me, these beautiful artists, are part of these stories. And therefore, I really felt like it would be a way of communion, coming together to weave together these stories, personal, coming from an intimate, personal story into a global human story. I couldn't have just my peers. I needed some who were older than myself and others who were younger than myself, because we have lived through different epochs and different eras, right? And so for me, it was necessary that these epochs cohabit on a single stage. Yeah, I also definitely wanted celebration. I wanted to celebrate us in a way, to celebrate our humanity, our femininity, our beauty, our resilience.
And you said it's not necessarily autobiographical, but you do tell history with your bodies. As far as I could see, a very beautiful movement. Why did you choose this method, this artistic method?
I'm always interested in mixing different artistic languages, be they through choreography, words, music, of course, scenography, light, and I think this piece also doesn't divert from this form of making sure that there is space for these languages to converse. When I knew that Yinka, for example, I really needed her presence in this piece because of her journey. I mean, all of them, because of each one has a particular journey, a particular story. I recognize myself in them. It's like they're mirrors, we are mirrors of each other. We are there to complete each other as well. There's a complementarity in what we're doing. So I really I had started to weave some moments in my head to dream about them, to dream about this plural, this multi-body of women, because also for me it was interesting to have different shapes, different skin colors, different hair types, or different way of moving into the space, of inhabiting the space. I really was interested in how we made what we became together, what we were individually, but also what we became as a unit, as a body of different bodies. And so each one, whenever we're doing improvisations, because I always start with improvisations and discussions and readings, photographs, and things like this. I knew that at some point our what we're doing as a body was gonna become like a melody composed of different melodies, a polyphony of different voices, different bodies that I felt could uplift one another. I really was interested in this notion of coming together, composing together, so these different layers, creating space for each one of them. For the first time, actually, I'm less on stage than I normally are, so it's quite nice. It feels good also to be outside of this body and to appreciate what I'm seeing, what I'm witnessing, to listen to their voices, to see their bodies in this space. So I think it really came from moments of improvisation, working with Alain Maillet on the music, working with Stéphanie Couder on the different costumes that for me were also spaces to inhabit. Each one, we are a thread. We are an endless thread. We are continually being woven into the next whole and into the next whole. And if you actually undo it, we are just one single thread. And so for me, whether it's through the music, through the costumes, through the bodies, the choreography, it's all one single movement. We are moving into the space together. We are physically engaged with one another on stage, and that's really what interested me. And I'm so glad that everyone was open to this kind of process.
And when I ask you about where the idea came from, you already mentioned history, exile, belonging. There was a particular sentence that struck me, which said, "How do I create roots on water?" I don't know, maybe it was Asma who...
Yinka.
Okay, Yinka then. So I wondered, I can imagine something, but what does this sentence mean?
Sometimes I don't know where it pulls together, but it has made the fabric across oceans and languages. I envy people who feel they belong to a particular soil. I feel orphaned in terms of place. I belong to the house I grew up in, the houses we inhabited, but always as islands. So I sail, I ride, I am on water. I am learning to root myself, but I haven't found the ground yet. How do I create roots on water? Sea trees, mangrove, extensive root system to maximize gaseous exchange, shallow water, tropical coastlines, oxygen-poor soil, and slow-moving water. Grow in the water, Roots act like stilts, holding their branches above the wake. This unique structure allows them to withstand the ebb and flow of tides. Tango. Mangroves are survivors.
I mean, I'm really grateful to Doro, who asked us to just write one day, but she kind of got us to kind of reflect a little bit about our ancestry to a certain extent, you know, how we are here. I think as African people all over the world, we have a real strong sense of those who've come before us. I really identify with being from the diaspora. I often sort of dream of the privilege of being African because there's a sense of like actually being rooted to that ground, whereas those of us in the diaspora are constantly somehow feels like you're searching for it. It's like you know it in a distant way, but you haven't really felt it in that sense. And so in my particular also life experience, I've moved around quite a bit. I've lived in the Caribbean, I've lived in Central America, I've lived in Europe. I speak various languages from that. I see the slave trade in my existence. My father's born in England, but from Jamaica, which is one of the islands where we understand like the worst violence has took place. People were just, you know, worked to death and then just brought new people in. So there was this constant sense of like generations actually not getting to be generations. My mother's from Ghana, but she's from Cape Coast, which is one of the places where you had one of the most important slave castles, where people from all over the Western Coast were, imprisoned before then setting off. Lots of people then dying in the seas. So all of this is like so present in me. And my grandmother, who's Ghanaian, she's actually mixed from like a slave-owning Jamaica. I mean, it's just so complex. It's like, it's all there. And I'm just so aware of how my being born in England is not a random thing. And so in a sense, this idea of the mangrove, which is really what came to me as I was writing, and I feel like I sort of identified with these trees that somehow manage to find the soil. Nevertheless, it's not firm soil. And the whole idea is that really they know how to survive. And in fact, they are like a shield. In many ways, they are the shield before you get to the land, you know. So it's sort of giving value to that place, you know, and also reconciling with myself in that dream of like, oh, I wish I could really say I was, you know, Ghanaian. I wish I could speak Fanti, which is my mother's, in fact, my grandparents' language, my mother doesn't even speak it. So it's this mixture of like loss, but at the same time, appreciation and accepting all of those things that make up who you are. And I think that is a reality for so many people in the diaspora in general. We all have these stories of as Doro was saying, of like loss, belonging, how the non-firm is a place and a place to speak from. So that's what that was for me.
And of course, we touched upon the Black identity, which plays, of course, a huge role in the play. All artists have African roots, and you also touched upon the subject of the ancestors. I remember also a sentence, something like, my grandmother doesn't count. Maybe it was also from you, Yinka, or from Asma. But Asma, how do you look at this Black identity and how where this is built on? Because usually it's always referred to the African continent, but maybe you could also say it's also formed, more like a fusion between countries. How do you look at this?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of to reflect on what Yinka's already said about being in the diaspora. You do, because I was raised in Europe, so I think you do get this sense that you're almost like creating these imagined places, which is something Doro said earlier as well. And that I guess the sense of homeland that your parents had is not really something that can be returned to. So my parents are from Somalia, and I think it's fairly destroyed from the war. But also I think as I've grown older, I've realized that there's actually it's actually a lot more complicated, which is something that Yinka brought up as well. That, like, you know, in Somalia, my family do hold like a certain amount of privilege, and that there are like oppressed groups within that country itself. So even, being able to say that I'm Somali is like a huge privilege. So for me, it's less about, returning to this place or even imagining returning to this place, but just, I think, trying to think a bit more, I guess, critically, And I do think that we have like a Black identity that exists in Europe or that exists in the UK. And I think even creating this piece, because we all came from like so many different places, I think there was so much that brought us together, and I think that is also, I don't know, like its own separate Blackness almost.
I was not native, which was everything. I was lost in the loam. I couldn't pronounce my name. I kept choking ululations. I kept calling my dead. I swallowed things. Glass, plastic. One time, a rusted key, because it was needless. I folded my body. It became groundwater, but nothing drank from me. I held too much. The plants wanted something softer, without memories. I thought of the other world too much. The people there, the way they turned fossil. The sea rose, fossil. The sky turned black, fossil. The world ended 100 times, and the people wouldn't stay. I kept telling them have faith. They kept finding new ways to leave here. The waves hardly buffeting the coast. The line between salt and fresh water. I remember those who laid themselves in the mouths of bigger things. I thought maybe this is what they meant when they said submission.
Dorothée, I also, like we talked a bit before about joy and celebration. There's a lot of beauty in the play, but also rage. And if we're talking about women and like what's it that they're angry about, or how could you can you describe some of this anger, or what you wanted to show?
What's there not to be angry about? There's so much. There is a lot that one can be angry about, not just as a woman, but just as a human being. When we were creating of course, there is a lot of anger and pain that is carried, as I was saying, through historical damage, right? That we are carrying from generation to generation, but also the period, the present in which we are living, or we were living in the moment of the creative process, which was during the whole Black Lives Matter movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and social justice movements, and everything that happens in the world is somewhat brought into the space, because we are thinking about it, we are conversing about it off and on stage, and therefore the rage for me is immense, as it is linked to what is happening or what has happened. So I can't particularly name exactly what we were enraged about, but I think of course it has to do with violence, the violence that is perpetuated against Black and brown bodies, against women, against trans people, against, all the minorities, all the people on the margins, for me is what I'm coming with. Or what my collaborators are coming with. We all come with intimate scars, with intimate stories, because, the trauma is immense. However, I know that when we were creating, I remember very well, there was a lot of protests in Nigeria, for example. There was protests in South Africa. There was protests in Malawi. There were protests in America. There were protests in Brazil. So it's huge. In Chile, like the whole world was going through a lot of. We're still going through it. It's not stopped. even today, marches for free Palestine or marches for the wars that are happening in the Middle East, people who are dying in India, people who are dying, like it's in Brazil, like it's ongoing. The rage is ongoing. So the peace for me is not just about 2020. It's not what we were enraged about didn't end. It's still ongoing. And therefore, while I'm singing, for example, while I'm moving, I know that I'm carrying with me ancestral, ancient rage, ancient pain, and also very contemporary, like in the moment, I cannot forget what is happening in the world. And therefore, the creative process is an invitation to not forget. It's an invitation to find ways to continue commemorating and at the same time resisting. And the resistance also takes place in the joy sharing, in encouraging one another, in celebrating each other, in singing, in moving, in breathing, right? Because we're still breathing after all. And I try not to forget that I still have air in my lungs in order to speak up, in order to sing out, in order to move across the stage. Even, one step is enough to remind myself that, yes, we're still here, we're still standing, we're still living, as we say in Mai. I see you, I see us, and that in itself is worth celebrating.
Yinka, did you experience this the same way?
When you said the word rage, I was actually like, oh, really? Where is the rage? In the sense of, everything Dorothée said is for me implicit in a way. But I think that for what I found so beautiful about the process and the work is that I feel like the act of us being together, the act of us engaging with those sensations that are intertwined, as they were saying, with like history and the present always, is also the act of like somehow exercising, somehow recalling, somehow, I don't know. So I feel that this, when I feel to them, I'm like, really, for me, these are emotions that are like completely like, this is what we're here to do. And we're saying that this is what we experience, but nevertheless, we have so much love. And I think that for me, the biggest thing about Mai has been the way the foundation of the creation is from love, which for me is a lesson to the world itself, because it's almost like that is where real creation happens, from the space of supporting each other, from the space of hearing each other, from the space of loving each other. And ultimately for me, that's what Mai is. So that's why for me, the rage, I'm like, oh, really? Because it's like we're transcending the rage. We're trying to get beyond that. And I don't know, I learned so much from the experience, and I learned so much from Dorothée in particular. And for me, it's like, no, here is somebody who is literally using love as the way forward. And then it's so interesting because now I'm like, oh, wow, that's actually what we need. That is like the secret to the planet. We're working from fear. And so I come back to the rage thing. I'm like, yeah, no, that's a transient thing, but it's not, for me, it's not about the rage at all.
From both points of Africa, half Madagascan, half Senegalese, but we fancied boys. Her mother made delicious food I often dreamt of.
Asma, if we're talking about learning, like during the creative process, what did you learn maybe more about yourself or about your identity because of you working together with these 5 other artists?
Yes, I'm laughing because I learned how to walk on stage.
You learned how to walk where?
I learned how to walk on stage, which is some type of walk. I learned so much, honestly. I think the whole process was so humbling and challenging, and I mean it's really just like, I think I'm just blown away by their talent, by their skill, their dedication to their craft. And the ways in which they like reached out also to me and held space for me and made me feel welcome in that space, and taught me, because obviously I'm not a dancer, so taught me about the ways that they move. And I think that's one of the things that really like helped our collaboration, is like understanding each other's processes. So I learned so much.
Yeah, and if we're talking about audience, I can imagine that an audience in Kigali will receive the play maybe differently than an audience in London. Dorothée, how do you look at this? Like, do you also have any plans maybe to play it outside of Western Europe?
Of course, I want to play it to our people everywhere, you know. But I think hopefully it will resonate in a sense that they will feel seen and loved and celebrated, you know, because it's true. And thank you, Yinka, for mentioning this. I think it's really a work that I felt like I needed to give so much love. I needed to give so much. It needed to come from not a place of hurt, because that is certain that there is hurt somewhere, there is trauma somewhere, but it also needed to be rooted in a lot of love, and joy, because for me joy is also a way of resisting, is a way of making it through that pain. I have no doubt that people will be moved by it. Even in Holland, when we come, I'm sure the people will be moved by it. But I really hope that, particularly Black and brown folks, Afro-descendants, when they see us, they feel like, yes, I'm feeling represented. I'm feeling uplifted right now.
Yeah, I really hope you get the chance to play there. And otherwise, indeed, you have, of course, through other ways they can see it. And I hope it will, trigger the emotion that you mentioned. At least I was moved, so I think a lot of people here will also be moved, maybe in another way. Doesn't matter. Yes. But I want to thank you all, the 3 of you, for this conversation and your open-heartedness. And I really hope that you can share the play with the rest of the world. And I wish you all the luck with this, and also in June, of course. So, thank you very much.
Thank you to you.
Thank
you, Asma. Thank you, Yinka.
Thank you.